This is On the Overlap, the platform dedicated to celebrating everything and anything that Scottish women's football has to offer. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the On the Overlap podcast, the show dedicated to promoting and celebrating anything and everything that Scottish women's football has to offer. The first round of fixtures in the SWPL 1 has just concluded, so what better time to introduce this podcast. My name is Jack Donnelly, the founder and creator of On the Overlap, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a good friend of mine to discuss the latest batch of fixtures in Scotland. You might know his voice and his face from anyone's game and not the old firm. It's Aberdeen's finest, Robbie Hanratty. Robbie, it's a pleasure to have you alongside me today, mate. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I'm doing very well, thanks, Jack. Cheers for getting me on. Always great to speak about women's football in Scotland.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I suppose with any guest I'm going to have on this podcast, I'll just pose them the first starting question. Robbie, what makes women's football in Scotland so interesting, so attractive to perhaps someone that would be looking to get into it?
Well, for me, the inclusiveness of Scottish women's football, you can just feel that when you're at a game, the players and the fans are a lot closer together, and it seems that community within women's football. And also, because it doesn't until recently get the attention that the men's game would be getting, players and teams can go under the radar. Like every weekend we're going to speak about it, but Motherwell and Aberdeen 4-3, Hamilton Spartans 2-2. There's high scoring games, entertainment. There's no guarantee each week a lot of the time who's going to win. And I just feel the women's football community is one that if I was not a women's football fan and looking in thinking of something to get involved in or go watch, I'd recommend getting along to a game on a Sunday, absolutely.
Absolutely fantastic. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's boundless entertainment in the game. I mean, 20 goals across the 5 games in the SWPL 1 this weekend, so no shortage of entertainment or drama. And that leaves us 9 games into the SWPL 1 season, meaning that the first round of fixtures is done and dusted. And already things seem to be splitting between the top and the bottom, with a real title race and relegation battle brewing already. Robbie, how much have you enjoyed the first third of the season so far?
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed the first third of the season so far. I must say, my team, Aberdeen, I enjoyed it more the first few games because they started really well, picked up 7 points from I think the first 4 games, and then they've not won a game since. So in terms of an Aberdeen fan point of view, I have not enjoyed it as much in recent weeks, but in terms of an SWPL, Scottish women's football fan, I think it's been fantastic, and you just see the to and fro. The fact that Rangers this weekend just finally, I think after like 10 meetings, got a win over Celtic, just shows that it's not easy despite spending all the money and having a full-time squad and everything. Last season, not qualifying for the Champions League. This season, bowing out the SWPL Cup to Celtic just last weekend. There's always going to be drama and there's always going to be talking points. And I feel as the weeks go on, there's more people taking interest in the women's football. And I'll use an example to you, Jack. I was at the rugby yesterday at Murrayfield. On the train back, these 4 middle-aged guys, what they're talking about, the Old Firm women's game on the way back. And I thought that was a great sign when you're hearing people out and about speaking about women's football, because we wouldn't have got that a year or 2 ago, especially before the World Cup.
No, I completely agree. And I think that's really telling of the progression of the game itself, because I feel like women's football for the last couple of years has been marketed really towards the younger generation and families and things like that, trying to get the new generation of football fans involved with the process as much as possible. So to hear that you're kind of hearing older generations and kind of more bog standard football fans at the moment sitting on a train and talking about the women's game, that's really fantastic to hear. I suppose from the first round of fixtures as well, have there been any kind of standout players that have caught your eye this season? Any shock results, anything unexpected that's caught you by complete surprise? What stood out to you the most in the first round of fixtures so far?
What stood out the most? I guess, for me, teams such as Partick Thistle, who only at the very last minute at 45 minutes expense got promoted from the SWPL 2 to the SWPL 1 as the league expanded from 8 teams to 10 teams. And I think Partick Thistle, what's impressed me about them, especially watching them against Glasgow City early in the season, that they weren't afraid to get their feet on the ball, play some nice football and just get in faces of. the opponents, no matter who they was playing. Whereas sometimes you see games where the so-called big three, Glasgow City, Rangers or Celtic, the opponent is a yard off the pace. No disrespect, but sometimes you see that. Whereas when I watched Partick so far, yeah, they're not flying up the table, but they've put in some great performances. I'll use another example, Spartans getting a draw against Celtic a couple of weeks ago. That was a standout result. And to be honest, they could have possibly won it, but then Celtic never had a chance to win it. But it was just an entertaining game, and one that, personally, Jack, most people would have voted Spartans off for that game, getting anything from Celtic. So to do that, and for the Spartans players to be actually disappointed in the end, said a lot, to be honest.
No, it definitely does. And I think, especially, did that game come before or after the Glasgow City game that Spartans played? Because I think when City absolutely slapped Spartans 9-0.
9-0, yeah.
Yeah, I think
it was the week after.
So I think coming off the back of that, you would be almost forgiven for not expecting a Celtic victory in that one. So it's just great to see just the fact that even though there are these 3 full-time teams and there's a lot more money in the league at the top end of the table than there has been recently, there's still a lot of real competitive edge, and there's no real way to target or predict absolute results. Well, I suppose we'll get into this weekend's action, and with this past weekend of fixtures, there was 2 massive clashes at the top end of the table with the top 4 all in action against each other. But speaking of the history of the game and the women's game in Scotland, rather, there's only really one place to start when it comes to this weekend, with the 2 most successful teams in the division taking on each other at the Tony Macaroni Arena, with Glasgow City scoring 3 goals to take home all 3 points against home side Hibernian in the first ever recast derby, or me and my cameraman at Hibernian Women, Douglas, we're calling it the Recastico rather than the El Clasico. So there's something to be said about that one, I suppose. Goals from Priscilla Chinchilla, Niamh Farrelly and Lauren Davidson wrapped up Grant Scott's time as interim head coach of City in style. Now, Robbie, I was at this game, of course, doing my job as a member of the Hibs media team, as commentator for the game. And to be honest, from my view of it, it wasn't the best game of football, which is a weird thing to say when there's 3 goals and it's the 2 kind of biggest sides or most successful sides in the country. But there just wasn't really an essence of overall quality to the match. It was just chances came very few and far between. And I think the difference that set City apart from Hibs in this one was that City took their chances. Basically every chance that City got, they took, or clear-cut chance rather. So they were just very clinical in putting away their chances. But what were your thoughts going into this one? Because obviously whenever City and Hibs play, there's usually a big fanfare and it's usually a big occasion. So did you expect as one-sided a scoreline as 3-0 suggests, or was it you're expecting it to be a bit tighter than it seemed?
So I'll take you back to my thoughts on the I Know Best Anyone's Game podcast last week. I thought that Hibs and Glasgow City would be a very tight affair. So you could look back to the last decade, as you say, both that sides, Hibs, SWPL Cup holders, Glasgow City won the league for however many times over the last decade. Lost count because they've just dominated Scottish women's football. And watching Glasgow City, a side I've probably watched the most live this season, they have got the results and like second in the table, but it's times that the play can look quite disjointed. But sometimes I think that's down to they don't have a settled starting 11 that you'd maybe see with Rangers, for example, or Celtic. Glasgow City have 23 quality players in the squad, and Grant Scott's job, and previously it was Scott Booth's job, was to make sure all these players are happy in a sense, and usually we'd have to leave 2 players out. But I honestly thought Hibs, under Dean Gibson, they'd won 5 games so far, sitting in 4th place. I thought Hibs could put up a good game against Glasgow City, but in the end, some of the goals, like Niamh Farrelly, I think she's done that against Rangers as well, like making that run to the far post and getting on end to score. You look at Lauren Davidson, what a month for Lauren Davidson.
That's been fantastic.
Scotland call up, goals galore. I think she got nominated for Player of the Month or something as well.
Yeah.
It's just been fantastic for Lauren Davidson. And the Glasgow side point of view, and you've got players like Lauren Davidson, Eva Colville, who I feel didn't expect to be a regular starter this season for Glasgow City. She's scored 7 and 9, or it might be the other way around, but she scored a lot of goals in Claire Shine's absence in the team. Then you've got Ode Flotadulu, and you mentioned Vincere Chinchilla. She's some player you think standout people or standout games this season. It was her first start since the Rangers game.
It was, yeah.
But every time I watch her, like sometimes she can be quiet in large spells of the game, but she'll pop up with just a bit of magic. And she's one of that players that I just really enjoy watching. And like you work at Hibs, and Colette Kavanagh, she was on the Anyone's Game podcast last week, and she chose Chinchilla in an all-time five-a-side team. It just shows what even other players in the league must have a lot of respect and look at Chinchilla as one of these players that is frightening to play against. But it's great for the league to have a Costa Rican international there, and obviously she caused enough damage to Hibs for that 3-0 scoreline, which I did see Dean Gibson said it was the worst performance in his 20 months in charge at Hibs. So I only seen the highlights and online stuff online, but I'm gathering that if he's saying that just couldn't get the tune out of that Hibs players then, because on paper, if I can speak about Hibs have recruited well in the summer, and I think they've got a good squad there, but I think they might be frustrated seeing Carla Boyson and Motherwell Davies for the hat trick,
yeah, of course,
and then Hibs struggling to score goals. But then again, two completely different opponents. But yeah, Dean Gibson rightly disappointed, considering that he would have wanted to keep the game a bit closer in a 3-0 scoreline.
I think speaking to him after the game, he was definitely attributing the lack of fight from Hibs and some poor decision making to what kind of ended up with City claiming the victory. And you mentioned it a lot there. I was going to ask you about Priscilla Chinchilla just in general, and you made the point that she's been reduced in her role this season. I mean, that was her first start since Rangers. You mentioned it there, but you just know she's got that moment of magic in her. Even if she's going quiet for 85 minutes, all she needs is 5 to make a real impact on the game. And considering that City have been struggling to settle in with a proper starting lineup, given that Aileen Gleeson is coming in now to kind of take full control of the side, especially with the Cup semi-final coming up this weekend, it's seeming like she's already got some selection headaches when you've got the likes of Chinchilla, you've got Vital Katz in there, of course, the Israel international, and a lot of talented players in that position. Yeah,
for sure, Jack. I think Aileen Gleeson will have a selection headache, as I say, just like the two previous managers in charge have had. But I think that's a good headache to have. In one way, yes, it's good to have a smaller squad, close-knit squad, and have a settled side. But it's good that they can have so many players that can come on and make a difference. Like sometimes you look at Glasgow City's bench and you've got Kaylin Mickey, Marie Fulton, Ode Flotadulu, and Vincere Chinchilla. I think it was the game previously, I think that was the bench. And you're looking at that and you think any of those 5 players can come on and make a really positive impact. And I think that's what teams need, because sometimes you can look to the bench at, say, Rangers and think, who's going to come on and score the goals? Whereas Glasgow City have got players that's reliable. Even Claire Shine, I think she may be injured. She was on commentary duty for Glasgow City
I saw that.
Recent game. But she's also, I think Claire Shine, Flotadulu, Davidson, Colville, Chinchilla, like Katz, like it's frightening. And I don't know, wouldn't want to be Aileen Gleeson having to pick just 1 or 2, depending on the system that they play, to play in that position. But I think you might touch on it later, but I know it's only 9 games in, but I think just having that squad depth could see Glasgow City very well again to claiming another title. That's just my kind of thought early in the season.
It's still very early days, and we know how hard pressed City will be by both Rangers and Celtic throughout the campaign. So it's probably a fair shout to estimate that City probably could pick up another title, but I think they'll be a lot closely challenged this season. Just a word on, I suppose, City's manager for this game at least, and Grant Scott. That was his final game in charge of City. Of course, he joined the club after leaving Hibernian Women, then Hibernian Ladies, as assistant manager to Scott Booth, then took on the interim head coach role when Booth went down to Birmingham City in the WSL, and now he's making way for Gleeson, as we said earlier. He's just I want to touch on him because anytime that I've dealt with him, of course, I worked with him a little bit when he was at Hibs, and then I got a chance to speak to him a little bit on Sunday, and he's just one of the real good guys in Scottish football and in the women's game. And I'm going to be sad to see him go if he does go completely from the women's game. But I don't know, are we expecting to see him pop up elsewhere in Scotland or potentially somewhere down south?
Well, I have to agree with you there, Jack. Grant Scott is one of football's good guys. If he's listening, I have to say that I told Jack who have a lot of time for you and clearly put a great impression onto that City side to be managed them very well and got them into a semi-final of the SWPL Cup and second in the league in his time there. So I think he's leaving Glasgow City in very good hands. And you think, obviously, there's no managerial vacancies in SWPL 1 at the moment, but I can't see Grant Scott being out of work too long because he's a very good coach, very good manager, and as I say, very nice guy. And I think as a player, I'd want to work with someone like that.
No, definitely. He just seemed to have time for absolutely everybody. I mean, when he was working at both Hibs and City, and we do wish him well wherever he does end up. Just finally, before we move on, just obviously Dean Gibson was less than pleased with the performance, and so was Alexa Coyle. I spoke to her after the match, and she was really disappointed with how things played out, and that just seemed to be the general consensus of the whole squad, as you would imagine it would be. But with such a big game coming up against Celtic this weekend in the SWPL Cup semi-final, how important is it going to be for Hibs to just put this one behind them as quickly as possible and get ready for another massive game this weekend coming up?
Yeah, I think it'll be extremely important, Jack, for Hibs just to put that one behind because it's uncharacteristic in a way for them to lose in that manner. Because watching Hibs this season, they've got that good balance of experienced players like Smalley, and we've got Joel Murray, players like that who are experienced. You've got Amy Gallagher, who's having some season really right. Amy Gallagher, Colette Kavanagh, Ginger Ronaldinho, as she likes to be called. I think she's a very talented player. So on paper, Hibs have got more than enough good players to match Glasgow City or give them a decent game. So you look to the SWPL Cup semi-final, that squad have got to just dust themselves down. I hate like these cliches, but you've got to look at it and think, just treat it as and just go into a point to prove and get themselves defend. So if they need any motivation, that's enough motivation for them, surely. And Dean Gibson, another nice guy every time I speak to Dean, and I can feel his frustrations as well. So I'm sure he'll be getting that players together and they'll be getting themselves sorted and ready to have a very competitive game against Celtic at the weekend.
Of course, this is Hibs competition coming up at the weekend. I mean, they've been holders of the competition, of the trophy, since 2016. So, considering that's been 5 years, I can't imagine they'll be keen to let go of the trophy anytime soon. So, just need to see how that one does play out at the weekend. We've mentioned their weekend opponents already, Celtic, and they played the first Old Firm of the league season on Sunday afternoon at the Pennycars Stadium. And for the first time in 5 games, it was another 1-0 scoreline, but it did not go the way of the Hoops as Rangers ran out 1-0 winners thanks to Zoe Ness's second-minute chipped goal over Chloe Logan. I mean, I saw the goal on Alba when it was live, and what a finish it was, just right over the top of the goalkeeper, Nestling Lovely in the back of the net. But, of course, Rangers avenging that cup exit that saw them knocked out of the SWPL Cup at the quarter-final stage. Charlie Welling scoring the only goal in a 1-0 victory for Celtic on that occasion. And it's a big, big bugbear off Malky Thompson's side's back because Celtic just seem to have had the rub of the green in recent encounters. And I suppose, Robbie, the question I've got is, what does his victory now mean for Thompson? I mean, despite the fact that he's been top of the league and he's staying top of the league going into the next couple of weeks at least, he's kind of been under a little bit of pressure, especially with the amount of money spent in the backing he's received to get the results in the big games, and questions were starting to brew after the cup exit. So is this now a step in the right direction?
Yeah, it is a step in the right direction, especially Finn Alonso. I spoke to Finn Alonso, Celtic manager, after them beating Rangers the previous week to get to the semi-finals at SWPL Cup, and he had said Rangers have by far the best squad and team in the league, but Glasgow City just have that something about them. And you've seen Rangers, just a different Rangers on Sunday against Celtic, just seeing that like sharpness was there. It was a bit of a point to prove, speak of a point to prove for Hibs. I think with Rangers, I think that was 10 games. Van Alonso had never lost to Rangers in his time as Celtic boss until the weekend. So, as you say, Malky Thompson, especially speak about, it's not in his words after the cup loss, it's not good for a club the size of Rangers, this loss. And as you say, they've spent a lot of money, invested heavily in that women's side. And I can imagine how much they'd be hurting with last season ended and then going up the cup. So to get that victory, just get one over the rivals, finally. Seen a video image of the captain, Nicola Doherty, just how ecstatic, like she's a big Rangers fan, plays for Rangers, just how buzzing they all were. Will be a bugbear, not just off Malky Thompson's back, but the players' back as well, because can't imagine the Rangers faithful had been too happy with the big game performances, because I've been to a lot of big games involving Rangers, and they can blow away the likes of Lizzie Arnott, who I love to watch play. I think she's a fantastic player. Brogan Hay, Zoe Ness, Jane Ross, Kirsten Riley. They've got so many great players, but they can roll over like some Motherwell, Spartans, Hamilton, but yet they'll play these big games and just can't get the tune together. Whereas for finally just to beat Celtic, they must just be buzzing. And I guess you look at it from a Celtic point of view, it must be really disappointing to be at home losing to a major rival. But if I was Celtic, the league's still not even got 2/3 to go. I'd rather be the one in the cup semi-final and have a chance of silverware, personally. If I was going to choose which game I had to lose.
Yeah, you would much rather the first league encounter than you would the quarter-final. I completely agree with you. And I suppose for a neutral coming in and not potentially have paid too much attention to it, you see Rangers go 1-0 up in the second minute, and you know the kind of recent history the rub of the green's been with Celtic, as I said, and you're thinking 88 minutes is a long time to hold out onto a 1-0 victory, for a 1-0 victory rather. But it was just all Rangers in this encounter. I mean, if it wasn't for Chloe Logan and Celtic's goal, Rangers could have won this one by 3, 4, 5 potentially. I mean, I think twice hitting the bar. I know there was definitely the Kirsten Riley shot from about 30 yards that bounced clean off the crossbar. But I suppose you're talking about the fact that Rangers can kind of steamroll teams like Motherwell or Hamilton. It's just a case of putting a lot more chances to bed, and they could be seeing similar results in the bigger games now.
Yeah, 100%. I think with Rangers, I'll just speak about City. Rangers have got the talent. They've got international players all over the pitch, and for them, as you say, scoring after 2 minutes, they could have scored a lot more in that game as well. And I feel that they got the win, but if I was Malky Thompson, that frustration, I've seen Dean Gibson, the Hibs manager, mention it a couple of weeks ago when they won, but it wasn't clinical enough for his liking. And to look at that with Rangers as well, they're creating so many chances. I know Chloe Logan made some great saves, but they'd probably be disappointed in a sense not to have scored more goals, because inevitably sometimes it could come down to goal difference between these teams for Champions League spots. And then Celtic, I've seen they started with Keegan Bowie from the start against Rangers. She really impressed me second half in the 1-0 victory in the SWPL Cup semi-final when she came on. But just seeing for Celtic, it was just something lacking. And I don't know if it was complacency after winning so many games against Rangers, just thinking, we can do this again, or if Rangers just up to a level. I'm not entirely sure, but speak of Hibs being uncharacteristic, at times Celtic uncharacteristic, and for me, Charlie Welling's not scoring a goal is uncharacteristic enough, because she's just been on absolute fire so far this season, and I'm sure she'll continue to do so, but she will be pretty disappointed not to have got a goal back or earmarked herself on that derby at the weekend.
No, absolutely, mate. I completely agree. She's just been on absolute fire for Celtic this season. Of course, she scored in the 1-0 win in the Cup quarter. And I don't know about you, but I'm expecting a big reaction from Alonso this weekend. I mean, that's the kind of unbeaten run in the league going after 9 games. That's the first loss of the season, and they've been almost impenetrable for the majority. So are you expecting Alonso to really go out and try and show his side's quality at the weekend against Hibs?
Yeah, I think they will, but we just analysed both games and looked heavily into the teams that have lost, Celtic and Hibs. Both will be wanting reactions, so it's hard to know what to expect, because sometimes when teams look for reaction, they don't get it, and other times they'll play out their skin and Celtic could go, no respect as you like for his, but Celtic could go and be like, yeah, we've got to take our chances. Wellings gets a hat-trick and not all buzzing again. But they could dwell on that old firm defeat and be caught cold, and Hibs could win. It's just hard to know how they're going to react. But Alonso, knowing his character, quite chirpy, happy guy, I can imagine how that, like, it all seems happy, but losing that game, because I knew how much it meant to him when I spoke to him the previous week, and how proud he was to have never lost to them. I can imagine that's probably is a bit of a bugbear, and he'll want to, like, I guess, redeem it to the Celtic fans by getting himself to a cup final at the end of the day, because teams like Celtic, it is great for Scottish women's football in a way that Celtic and Rangers were put up against each other in the quarterfinals of the cup, because one of that top teams is out, so spices things up a wee bit. But Celtic, Alonso just want to bounce back by booking himself a place in that SWPL Cup final.
Yeah, no, I think there'd be something quite poetic about it if, come the end of the night on Sunday, despite all the money and all the investment, that neither Old Firm club ends up in the cup final. There'd be something a bit poetic about potentially another Hibs or Hibs against City final. I mean, we saw how good that was the back end of 2019, the 4-3 game. That was just absolutely outstanding. So yet to be seen whether that does play out. We'll get onto a little bit of a preview for the semi-finals in a little bit to round out the show, but still got plenty of SWPL 1 action to discuss. And I mean, we'll go from one end of the table to another now, Robbie, as Hearts picked up a huge 3 points on the road at Partick, who had been in a bit of a decent run in the league themselves. I mean, they picked up a really good home win over Hibs a few weeks back. And 3-2 to Hearts, Robbie, a really entertaining tie. How did you kind of see this one playing out coming into it?
Well, I think it's both. As I said, I spoke about Partick earlier, being a team that they've won 2 games and drawn 2, and then so they're hard to predict at times, but they play good football. I rate Brian Graham as a guy, and I think it's actually quite typical of Partick at times, because I've watched them and they've lacked that goal scoring threat to score goals, but yet the manager is one of the top scorers in the Championship with Brian Graham. However, an entertaining game against Hearts, as you say. 3-2. I thought it would be a close game. Probably would have predicted a draw. Thankfully, I wasn't down to do the predictions for anyone's game, but a draw probably would have been, in my mind, a fair result. But for Hearts, who only was spared relegation last season due to the league reconstruction, for them to pick up that 3 points under new boss Eva Allard, that's fantastic victory for Hearts. And sometimes goals were the thing that was lacking for Hearts. Like, they concede a lot of goals. Charlotte Parker-Smith got a lot of criticism last season at times, but I think this season especially, yeah, they're still conceding some goals, but she's making some very crucial saves in games as well. And I think in the Partick game, she made a couple of saves that really cemented that victory in the end. So, yeah, fantastic win for Hearts, and that puts them off the bottom of the table with Hamilton, the switch with Hamilton. So they'll be pleased just to get off that foot of the table, because Hearts fans will want to see themselves maybe end up in SWPL 2 next season.
Yeah, no, I think Hearts fans will be getting a bit too used to seeing the bottom of the table, and they'll be happy just to even jump just the one place above. You mentioned Charlotte Parker-Smith there. I want to get onto her because I think a lot of the criticism she received last season was quite unwarranted. I feel like she's a really solid goalkeeper and has been for Hearts. I think she got the SWF save of the season, I think, last season for a really good stop against City. But I didn't really see that side to her, especially even from the highlights in this one. I mean, questionable, you would say, for both goals. I mean, maybe the first one not as much, but the second one just palming it up over her head and into the back of the net. You would argue she probably could do a little bit better for both.
Yeah, in this instance, as I say, watching her this season, I do see a big improvement with shot stopping and does make some crucial saves. But like any women's football is different for anyone listening in a sense, because they haven't got specialised goalkeeping coaches in a sense. And I feel we often see the same error. We're going to go on to the Aberdeen game, but the same error of palming it up and it goes in. It happens. And Charlotte Parker-Smith won't want to look formally back on that goals they conceded, but because her side still got the victory in the end, that's what really matters for a team down the bottom, because I feel from Hibs downwards, Motherwell, Partick, Spartans, Aberdeen, Hearts and Hamilton, all that sides will take points off each other and have close games like 4-3s, 3-2s. So I think it'll balance itself out. So for Charlotte Parker-Smith, she won't be scrutinised the way she was last season if they're picking up victories like they did on Sunday.
Yeah, a very good point. And like I said, I do rate Parker-Smith. I think she's a bit of an underrated goalkeeper. I think she's a really solid option for Hearts to have, but just a bit of a questionable performance, I suppose you could say, on Sunday afternoon. But looking at the other side of things, Robbie, I mean, you mentioned it already, relegation is a real possibility for these sides this season. I mean, it only wasn't last year because the league was being reconstructed, expanding from 8 teams to 10. These games are going to mean everything to these sides that are going to be down at that end of the table. And given how well Partick have done in the last few weeks, they're going to be really gutted to have lost this one, especially so late on.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, I look at Partick, another outstanding result. I just really clicked just now. Them beating Hibs earlier in the season as well. That result was a big statement, and that's when I really thought, I know Hibs, they made changes that day. There was a lot of questions. Did that backfire, changing the goalkeeper and squad that day when they lost to Partick? But yeah, Partick will be disappointed. They'll look at themselves, first season in the top flight, after not even knowing they're going to be in the top flight. So surely it was hard to prepare for that. So to be sitting in 6th place after the first round of fixtures, they've got to be pretty pleased with that. In Hearts, that victory comes at a good time as well, because you don't want to be looking at the table after the first round of fixtures and being on 3 points bottom. Just that gap starts to open up and you're thinking, oh gosh, is Eva Ollard the right choice to be in charge with no experience of managing in Scotland? So look at it both sides, and I'm sure, as I say, Partick will be... I do look at it as a surprise. Partick, London Pollard has always impressed me so far this season by Partick, and she's just signed for Motherwell. So it'll be interesting to see how that one develops, because they're both very close together in the league, but I'm not entirely sure how transfers work in SWPL in terms of them just moving so like a third of the way through the season. But I think that'll be a big loss for Partick, because she gave a slightly different, like more direct in behind, run onto it sort of approach, and also has that vision to score goals from distance as well. So Partick's loss will be Motherwell's gain when it comes to London Pollard.
No, I completely agree. I think she was very, very highly thought of when she was at Celtic, and I think being able to sustain a good run of games is going to be important for her going forward. Looking at another fixture down the bottom end, Hamilton 2, Spartans 2. And, I mean, Hamilton will potentially be a bit hard done by in this one, because, I mean, a solid point against Spartans, who have been an established SWPL side for a few seasons now. I mean, the Hearts result meant that Hamilton dropped to the bottom of the table after the first 9 games. And it's obviously a very long season, and there's plenty of football left to play. But given Hamilton's current position, Aki's fans would surely be a bit forgiven for feeling a little bit worried at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Aki's fans can be a bit worried. But last season, Aki's really impressed me. And it's just not just because I know a lot of the players, know the management, Boy Watson and Gary Doctor, really nice people. But I thought they had a pretty good squad. But as Aberdeen are also seeing, that transition from SWPL 2 to SWPL 1, these fine margins for mistakes, there's really little margin for error in these games. And Hamilton, the worst goal difference in the league at minus 19 goals, 6 defeats out of the 9, 1 win. It is going to be really frustrating for them. And if they lose, it's one of these things, it's just picking up that next when you see Hearts getting a win, move off the bottom. Hamilton really need that to come sooner rather than later as well, because you don't want that gap opening up and then suddenly thinking we're going to end up back down in SWPL 2. They want to be cementing the place in the top league. But you mentioned relegation. I know it's very early days, but when only 5 points separate between 5th and bottom, it could change a lot over the next however many games of the season. You think to yourself, every team will have blips, every team will manage to get a little runner for them. And Hamilton, with players like Josie Giard, a player that I really rate highly, there's players there that Hamilton squad that can score goals and can hopefully, but for a Hamilton point of view, get themselves into a better position.
No, absolutely. And I think you think about it, Hamilton, their one win came on the opening day in that late victory over Hearts. So they've really gone 8 games without a win. So they're going to really need that win sooner rather than later. Robbie, looking at the other side of things, are Spartans going to be a bit tired of the same old routine at this point? Because that's our 5th draw of the league campaign so far. Far more than anyone else in the league, in the division. I mean, 5 draws, it's their specialty at this point. So I don't know, would you almost rather a loss at this point just to give Spartans fans something a little bit different?
Well, I must say, I wanted to put this line in. Being a Spartans fan must be like being an Aberdeen fan when Craig Byrne was manager, because we got very used to drawing a lot of games. And I feel watching Spartans, if I was going to be a betting man, you just know it's going to be a tight game, going to be a draw. But you think about it, it's actually very impressive. They've played all around the fixtures and only, like, yeah, they've had 3 losses, but it's impressive and not impressive in a way, because I can see it in 2 ways, because they're holding teams and not having that loss. So they've obviously got that knack of getting that results in securing a point like they did against Celtic. But then again, turning those into wins. And as you say, we Spartans fans not get bored of it. Playing against the bottom of the table side in Accies, would you be expecting to win? Last season, they obviously, I think it was tied 4th for Hibs last season for Spartans, and it's already looking a bit of an ask to be up there with Hibs this season. So, be interesting. But they have got Spartans, as you say, established side. They've got some good players in the team as well, like Cat Smart, Robin McCafferty, players that are highly rated. So, they should be fine for relegation. I think it'll be another mid-table finish for them. If they can turn that draws into some more goals, get Becky Galbraith back, firing them in like she did last season.
Yeah, definitely. I still think Mickey Macaroni's been a big loss for them this season. I mean, he's been a big loss for Hibs as well. Just the last few weeks she's been sidelined with injury. Hopefully get to see her back fit in a few weeks' time. But finally, and I think it has to be game of the weekend just for the scoreline alone. I know your red persuasion might not see it that way, considering your team were on the receiving end of 4 goals, but Motherwell secured a show-stopping victory at home to SWPL 2 champions Aberdeen. But the Dons did not go down without a fight, with the score finishing 4-3 to Motherwell. Robbie, starting with the home side, Motherwell, they've been active over the last couple of weeks and getting some more additions to the squad. You named London Pollard. I think she only just signed at the weekend, if I'm correct. It was a very, very recent addition. But they also brought in former Hibs duo Carla Boyce and Katie Rice. Of course, Rice joined Hibs from Motherwell back in the winter of 2020 and ended up rejoining the club after leaving Hibs due to travel. I think this travel was just getting a bit too much for her, so ended up leaving the club and rejoining Motherwell. But as good as Rice was in this game, Boyce will no doubt steal the headlines for a home debut hat-trick in front of the Motherwell fans, which, I mean, you can't really get off to a much better start than that, I suppose.
Yeah, I must say, I predicted this in a group chat for anyone's game. As soon as I seen Carla Boyce had left Hibs, I said, I bet you should go to a team like Motherwell. I just kind of seen her fitting in a team like that, and especially the philosophy that Motherwell want with Paul Brownlee in charge, highly thought of, and Leanne Crichton there. I can see, you look what a couple of victories for Motherwell has done, put them up to 5th place, and Pollard, Boyce and Rice, fantastic signings, and that can put them ahead of the chasing pack because they've got that depth now, because they've already got Laurie Gardner, Kayla McDonald and Gua. They've got other players that can also step in with goals, but having more players, like speak about selection dilemmas at Glasgow City, the exact same with Paul Brownlee now. Do you sign Paula? Do you throw her in? There's all this sort of stuff. But Carla Boyce, you mentioned that used to play for Hibs, was short of game time, but I thought last season when she played, thought she was very good. And rate Carla Boyce, but to get a hat-trick on her debut for Motherwell, it must be no better feeling for Carla to do that. And yeah, it was probably 2 of the goals fortunate, because the Aberdeen goalkeeping defending was pretty shocking, to say the least. But as a striker, you've got to take the chances when you're presenting with them, and that's what she's done. In the confidence as a player, and for Carla, be no better feeling going into the next game, knowing that you're just on the back of a hat-trick, how to fit in with a new team. Well, you're banging in 3 goals. Your teammates will certainly be want to be pals with, that's for sure.
No, absolutely. I don't know what you feel about this, but Motherwell have really impressed me this season, not just for what they've been doing on the pitch, because obviously they've been looking quite good, and obviously they're sitting just behind the four you would expect to be in the top four positions. But I think just their approach to women's football this season has been massively improved. I mean, one thing that struck me straight away just before the season even began, they designated social accounts over to Motherwell Women as well, rather than just having everything lumped through the men's channels as well. So they're giving
subject last season.
Yeah, definitely was. Getting someone in like Leanne Crichton in a player coach role, that's a big statement of intent from them and how seriously they're taking things. The signings that they've made, I think Motherwell are just taking real steps in the right direction and developing their own women's game, and I'd imagine you'd probably agree with that.
Yeah, they've got their own Facebook page as well for Motherwell Women, as well as the Twitter, and they're really active and putting a lot and more social media content into it. And I feel like, not that they've been forced to, but when you're linked to a professional men's team, there's kind of added pressure that now with the league developing, there's the highlight shows, televised games, it would look bad on teams like Motherwell if they didn't start to be seen investing a wee bit in the women's side. Mm-hmm. So getting Leanne Crichton in Scotland International, fantastic. She still got it. You see she hit the crossbar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Double a couple of weeks ago, and I made her my player of the week for anyone's game, Leanne Crichton. And I still think just that experience for the rest of that Motherwell side to have someone like Leanne Crichton like coaching you, it must be amazing. So yeah, Motherwell on and off the pitch, they're showing a big example, because if anyone from Motherwell's listening, they'll be first to admit last season it'd be really hard to even get a team line up, because especially if they was playing on the same day as the men's team, there'd be no women's updates. It'd be really hard for say prospective fans already of Motherwell with an interest. You wouldn't know what's going on. You'd have to look at the opposition team. But now they've stepped up the game on and off the pitch, and it's a credit to them. 3 wins, 1 draw, 5 defeats, but 3 wins in 9 games. I think it's very good. And I look at it, I was disappointed Stuart Hall wasn't appointed like the manager. I thought he'd done a fairly decent job when he came in an interim boss at the end of the season. But now I see it paying off getting Paul Donnelly in, because that whole setup, what they have, seems to work really well, and it can only be upwards from there. Motherwell, with the recruitment they've made, I can see them having a successful season.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just remember last season, any time Hibs were playing Motherwell, I found it such a hassle to try and get names and a full lineup sorted for the match report after the game, because there would be no no team line published anywhere on socials, so it would be an absolute nightmare to try and get who was actually playing on the pitch.
The website wasn't updated with like the up-to-date players at times, so even you could write down a number such and such, but it wasn't linked. So now
someone completely different.
I feel as a pundit, writer of women's football, enthusiast of women's football, I've got a lot bigger knowledge of Motherwell's team thanks to them having a social account and taking it serious. So it's not just helping Motherwell fans, it's helping everyone in women's football really, and expanding the game to a wider audience.
Yeah, and that's definitely what it's all about just now, just getting that game to a wider audience. Now, just to round out the SWPL 1 chat, I'm going to ask you about Aberdeen. And I know after an Aberdeen loss, you would typically just go on for hours about things, but we'll try and keep it as short as we possibly can, because we've just got a little bit more to talk about before we wrap up. But even after this, I've liked watching Aberdeen. I feel... Is the league's entertainers potentially a bad shout as well as a good one? I feel like they, every time you throw that entertainers tag around, you think Kevin Keegan's entertainers, and they were very bad and very good at many different points during their season. So it's been an interesting time for Aberdeen coming up to division, and as you said, it's been difficult for them just to adjust in terms of having the lack of margins for error and things like that. But how have you viewed it as the fan of Aberdeen? I mean, have you been kind of satisfied? Have you kind of been hitting expectations, or what's been your general consensus of the season so far?
Oh, I was crying in my pillow, I tell you. I thought at the start of the season, after emphatically winning SWPL 2, as I say, can't say until 2 seasons ago, I had a massive knowledge of women's football, and I think I've realised the last 6 games for Aberdeen, just the margin for error in the top league. There was games that didn't play well, watched them against Queen's Park away last season, watched them against Killie as well, and they didn't play well at times, but they done enough to turn it on last 20 minutes, get that 2 goals or whatever. Whereas when you're giving teams 3-0 leads, like we did to Motherwell, yeah, you're making it such a hard ask to come back. But looking at the start to the season, we ran Celtic close, like 5-3 first game of the season, then draw with Spartans. Like, I think the first 4 games were pretty reasonable, as I say, 7 points from 4 games. And then since then, they haven't won a game. So it's been really, Hearts one was a sore one to take. They surrendered, I think, 2-goal lead that day. And then you look at, and I'm not going to play victim here, but Aberdeen have had a lot of injuries. When you've got your captain, that I'd say is a very solid defender in Callie Forrest. She's been out injured. You've had Bailey Hutchison, who was top scorer in SWPL 2 last season, who I think is a fantastic footballer, played at Scotland at youth level. She's been out injured, and she showed her class with a goal against Motherwell at the weekend. You see a nice cheeky finish, reminding me of Zoe Ness's goal in a way, just dink over the goalkeeper. So you've got Aberdeen, you look at it, they've got Eva Thompson, they've got Bailey Hutchison and Francesca Ogilvie as their front three. I think in terms of SWPL, top 4 down, they've got a very strong front three, but it's just that basis. And sad to say it, with Kelly being injured, the back line, inexperience from the goalkeeper who's 17, Gail Gilmore, you have to cut her a bit of slack because of her age, but being thrown into SWPL 1.
I thought she did really well when Hibs played Aberdeen the 1-0. I thought she had a pretty good game, a few decent saves she made. So I think there's definitely a good goalkeeper in there.
Yeah, no, I certainly think the same. Even in that Motherwell game, she did make a couple of good saves, but it's the same. I don't know if it's just what they're told at Aberdeen to play the ball up from the back, but if I'd been making the same mistakes that Aberdeen defence / goalkeeper has been making, that's costing very tight games, I'd be playing the ball long. And I don't advocate a team I support playing hoofball, as you call it, but a lot of the goals could be avoided. I think Emma Hunter said that, like, they could see the nerves on the side and things like it was played like a cup final in a way, but the problem was giving away that 3-goal lead and in the manner, like throwing the ball out to like boys basically. It's like that communication. I can imagine as a young goalkeeper, building that confidence to command your box. Yeah, you can be a good shot stopper, but just having that confidence and trust for your defenders. And first season in the SWPL 1, got to remember, and listeners might, or viewers might not all know this, like that's back-to-back promotions for Aberdeen. They was down in like the Championship North 3 seasons ago. So yeah, they've been taken over by, used to be AFC Ladies, now it's AFC Women. They've been taken over by AFC. So they've set out a 2-year plan. They've done that. They've got to the top flight, but it'd be inexcusable to be seeing them in a relegation battle or going back down again. They really need to cement themselves in the division. I've not got high expectations. I can't say challenge the top 4 or anything, but cementing themselves in that league. But I see it in 2 ways. Emma Hunter, she said numerous times it's hard for Aberdeen to get players. But I can understand in a way, yeah, at this level, you're not full-time, getting players from the Central Belt from the other sides. But surely, up in Aberdeen's only top team in that northeast area, surely the pick of the northeast to be able to attract and get players. So I think it's just getting that awareness. And I think Colette Kavanagh was saying the fact that basically all the players that she played with at youth level now don't play. So it could be a hidden talent up in the northeast that Aberdeen don't know about. But with the, like, I guess there's sometimes not enough perks in the women's game to get, because people are balancing jobs, etc. But looking at Aberdeen, they've got, last season I rated Ailey Shaw in the midfield. I think she still puts a very good shift in, but just finding a settled side. Now injuries hopefully are cleared up. Forrest came on late on in that comeback when they nearly got a comeback against Motherwell. They nearly was very close. I think it was a good finish from Ogilvie as well, actually, for
good.
Aberdeen's 3rd goal. But I think getting players back is key for Aberdeen and picking up results against the teams around them. If they can do that, they should be okay. But I'd be more inclined to say, looking at that two sides from that 4-3 victory, that Motherwell will finish ahead of Aberdeen because they've just got that depth a wee bit more rather than inexperience as well on this side. Whereas there's a lot of young players that are not naive to top flight football, but sometimes, as Adam Hunter would probably say, sometimes mistakes, in my opinion, sometimes mistakes are good because they'll learn from it. I'd rather learn from it and stop it rather than do it every week, especially young players. So get it out of them now, and then hopefully stay in the division this season, and then they can build for next season. That's how I'd look at it as an Aberdeen's point of view.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. I mean, just looking back at that SWPL one weekend, 20 goals and across the 5 matches, absolutely fantastic. But we need to remember it's not just about the top division. There was some action going on in the SWPL 2 this weekend, so we'll take a look at the biggest headlines from there. The league leaders, Glasgow girls and women, continued their unbeaten streak, sitting top. With 6 wins and a draw, if I'm correct, after 7 games. Winning at narrow margins once again against Boroughmuir Thistle in a 3-2 victory. Robbie, Lucy Ronald has been a massive influence for Glasgow girls and women this season, obviously joining on loan from Hibs. She went, as the cliche goes, from hero to zero after scoring, then getting sent off later in the 90 minutes. She's been massively influential for the league leaders already this season. So how do you reckon they're going to fare without her? I know you mentioned to me that they're going to appeal the red card, but if the appeal's unsuccessful, it's going to be a big loss for a couple of games.
Yeah, you put it very well, saying hero to zero, from scoring to getting sent off. She said to me that was going for the ball and wasn't like they're going to appeal it because she didn't feel like it was a sending off. But if it doesn't get overturned, she's a really huge player on loan from Hibs, if I'm right in saying. So dropping down a division and she's romping it, scoring goals, dictating play, really impressive. Anytime I see highlights of or I've been to a game of Glasgow girls and women, I think Lucy Ronald, fantastic player. And when you look at, there's only 3 points separate leaders, Glasgow girls and women, and Dundee United, but Dundee United have a game in hand. There's that sort of thing. With that title race, I know one player doesn't make a team, but when someone is so influential in that side, it would be a big loss for Glasgow girls and women. But then again, I think they've also got, you can see that gap in that league this season. You've got Glasgow girls and women, Dundee United and Kilmarnock, who are all pretty in good form. Killie have lost 2 games, but in recent weeks they've been pretty good, whereas you've got the other, Boroughmuir, you can't write them off for maybe a playoff position, but you've got St Johnstone, Stirling and Queen's Park, who you've got to look at. I'm not sure who Glasgow women's next game is, but I think they could cope. But Lucy Ronald, no disrespect to the other sides, but I think they've got a lot of good players on their side that can do that. But another high scoring, for listeners thinking about women's football, get along. You might not even know the teams, not know the players, but high scoring football, entertainment, drama, goals, sending offs. Who wouldn't want to see that?
I mean, not much more you can ask for, really. You mentioned both teams will come to Killie next because they obviously got another win, winning 3-1, I do believe, and in that game against Stirling University. And it was another 2 goals for Lisa Swanson, who has just been on absolute fire. I mean, she's a big reason as to why Killie are the top scorers in the second tier at this moment in time. And given that the Ayrshire side are the top scorers and Swanson have been doing so well, I mean, could you imagine potentially another club, potentially a level above, could come sniffing around and be keeping tabs on the striker?
Well, this is what I've been thinking a lot. Like Lisa Swanson, the goals she scores as well, I don't know if you've seen the highlights, but it's also just really good finishes and also a player eye for goals. She was at Rangers for a decade or something, and I know it broke her heart when she had to leave Rangers and went to Killie. And I think at Killie, she's found a place that she can call home. I think she's really enjoys it there. She's scoring goals. She's told me she wants to set the target of being top scorer in the league and getting promotion. And the thing with Killie, some of these games, they're going a goal down, but they've got that resilience to come back and win games. Or I think it was a draw against Queen's Park, but came back really late. And it's that sort of thing. When you've got a goal scorer like Lisa Swanson, surely teams down at the bottom, such as a Hamilton or even Spartans, who are struggling to score goals, would look at Lisa Swanson. But I've got to think that there's a reason why she's at Kilmarnock in terms of the way women's football is with work, area, etc. It's probably convenience more than anything, because she's certainly a player that could score goals at the top level and has got that in her to do so. And someone that us on the Anyone's Game podcast rate very highly. We'd not write off a team to get beat ever again.
No, absolutely not. And just to round it out, of course, Dundee United winning again, running away 6-0 winners away to Queen's Park. We've mentioned it already, Robbie, but they are currently second in the SWPL 2, 3 points behind Glasgow Girls and Women, but they do have a game in hand and have a superior goal difference at the moment. So it's really shaping up to be an interesting and very exciting title race when you lump Kilmarnock into that as well. Just before we round out today's show, we are going to be having a look ahead to this coming weekend when both semi-finals of the SWPL Cup are due to play out at Forthbank Stadium in Stirling. Glasgow City face off against Spartans at 12 p.m, while holders Hibernian take on Celtic in the later kick-off at 4:30. Starting with City and Spartans, the earlier kick-off. I mean, the last encounter between the two, Robbie, City were absolutely ruthless, running out 9-0 winners over Spartans in the league back at the start of October. Can we see quite as dominant a display from City on Sunday, or with the new manager coming in, could we see just maybe a bit of experimentation potentially, just an opportunity for Gleeson to try and figure out our best 11 or see what ticks best for her Glasgow City side?
It is an exciting time for Glasgow City fans with a new boss, Ellen Gleeson, coming in, assistant at Northern Ireland previously. But I think 9-0 victory, that was emphatic. But we say this with Spartans, with draws and everything. It's a cup, even though it's a cup semi-final, it's a cup final for Spartans. No disrespect to any Spartans player listening. They're not favourites to win. No one would expect them to do much, but you just never know. I think it'll be a lot closer game than we've come to expect. And I think it's just a case of taking chances at one. In these games against top sides, you got to take your chances when you get them. You won't get very many at times. And got to look at it. Glasgow City's got a very competent goalkeeper in Lee Alexander. The amount of times I watch him make top class saves for Glasgow City is I've lost count. But I think Spartans, as we touched upon, they're a bit hot and cold side. Oh well, draw side, but this game's when they draw, they probably should win, but they get a draw and then getting beat 9-0 by City. But I think it'll be a lot closer game, and I'd like it to be a close game. You know, actually, I did know, but I actually forgot. Saying that both games are on Sunday at the same stadium, I think that's good for getting people. I don't know how they're doing the ticketing, etc., but getting people along to even taking two games, a family, make a whole day out of it, rather than just if we're split around the country or whatever.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Definitely good for getting the neutrals in, especially. I'm not sure how ticketing is going to work. I know it's pay at the gate. I don't know if they're going to do any tickets online. I've not really seen any information about that, but you can definitely pay at the gate on the day. And we'll need to see just whether that carries over and you can get both games if you come at 12 or whether it's just a one-off. But the second game is probably the glamour tie of the two. You've got Hibs going up against Celtic, and the last time these two met, Charlie Wellings, her name's already come up a couple of times already in this podcast, Robbie, but she got the winner for Celtic in stoppage time against Hibs back in the league. It's definitely the most intriguing of the two times. These are two teams that are coming out looking for a good reaction after losing against rivals this weekend gone past. So a really, really exciting game on the bare face of it before we even get into the specifics.
Yeah, a really exciting prospect. I think it's a game that I want to make sure I'm tuned into on Sunday. I think I will be heading back down the road from Aberdeen at that time, but I'm assuming the games might be on Alba, but SWPL Cup, I'm unsure will be, because BBC's not got highlights, but whenever I can watch it, I'd love to see that game, because I think, as we touched upon earlier, both teams have a point to prove, bouncing back in a place in that cup final. And no matter what the cup is, no matter if it's women's football, men's football, school football, as a player, you want to be lifting silverware. So there's no bigger motivation, especially look at Hibs, players like Gabby English, Tori Malone and Alexa Coyle, the first taste of football in Scotland. So they won't want to have that on the CV of being the team that surrendered that cup that they've held for the last 5 years, give or take, with COVID. So I think that as well. And speak about Carly Boyce earlier. I know it's game time, Mufler and all that, but Hibs, I've got Alexa Coyle, and we've mentioned some of the fantastic players they've got, but still the sort of thing is, I know it's hard to keep players happy, but Glasgow City seem to do it. I would have kept someone like Boyce, because you need players off the bench to come on and make an impact. And as you say, injuries can happen, like in a completely different position, but as you say, Michaela McAloney getting injured, how big an impact that's made. So you just take Alexa Coyle to get injured, and then there's issues. So I guess looking at that game, you'd edge on thinking Celtic, but on a one-off cup semi-final, it's really, really hard to predict, and I think it'll be very, very tight. I'll say this now, it'll be 4-0 either way, because for my predictions, but I know as like Joelle, as a Hibs captain, as a big Highbie, she'll know, and she's been there through it all as well.
Absolutely,
she'll know exactly how much it means, and she'll have that rattled. If it's not, if we don't listen to Dean Gibson, I'm sure we'll listen to Joelle and make sure that is a performance similar to the game at the weekend just past.
No, absolutely. I'm really excited for both games to see which two teams do end up in the SWPL Cup final. And for anyone listening or watching that fancies making it along on Sunday to Fourth Bank, tickets are available to buy on the gate. They're £5 for adults and £2 for children or concessions. So really affordable, really accessible, as the majority of women's football in Scotland is. And with that, we are going to wrap things up. Thank you very much for joining us for the debut episode of the On the Overlap podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure having you along for the ride. We've got a website in the works, so for news on that and any other episodes of the podcast, head over to Twitter and follow us at on_the_overlap. I couldn't get the right Twitter handle in time, so it's a bit of a mashed together one just so it's looking some sort of decent way. A massive thank you has to go, of course, to yourself, Robbie Hanratty, for joining me throughout this episode. It's been absolutely fantastic having you along, mate. Let the people know where they can find you and the work that you're doing.
So you can find me over at the Anyone's Game podcast. So we try to get out to as much women's games as possible. I guess that's where my knowledge comes from mingling with the women's players, recording podcasts, interviews, features, just everything within women's football you can find over at Anyone's Game. You can also find me at the Old Firm, do a lot of match reporting there, and more recently at the Daily Record Sports Desk. So you see Robbie Hanratty, sports writer, pop up in an article you're reading, it might just be me. So
might just be you.
It's been a pleasure, Jack, for having me on today. And as always, it's lovely to chat about women's football and the thing that we're so passionate about these days. And I'm hoping any listeners can start to feel the same and see the passion on our faces run through on them before time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all we can hope for, mate. To end things off, I've been Jack Donnelly, and until next time, watch women's football, support women's football, and above all else, enjoy women's football. We'll see you next time.